Hey, my name is Mike Harrison, and welcome to this edition of the Religion Hurts podcast. Religion Hurts, this is incidentally the new name of the podcast. I've done one video before this, so this is only the second video, so kind of a newbie here, so give me a little bit of grace, although I'd love to get some feedback from you if you've got anything that, or comments or just anything. I just welcome having a conversation. That's kind of the point of this video. Is to introduce conversation. So a little bit of background on me. Again, before I get into this, you can go check out the original testimony video. I think I'm going to find some way to link it below. I am not the best at this technology stuff. I do have some friends helping me though, so I'm sure we can figure something out. And you can watch my whole introduction video as to what the purpose of this series is, what I'm trying to accomplish, what I'm trying to talk about, and just everything from there. But essentially, I'll just give a quick recap. My name is Mike. I am a 45-year-old male living in central Minnesota, actually born and raised in Canada, Toronto until I was 14 or just outside of, and then southern Manitoba right on the American border until I graduated from high school. I'm a contractor now. I've done carpentry almost all my life, other than a little stint of some retail and driving truck. I actually took a break for almost 3 years to drive truck. Got to see the whole country, been in all over 48 states. Beautiful, beautiful country America is. Additionally, so right now I own a small contracting business where I primarily do a lot of subcontracting these days and a lot of carpentry, project management, that kind of things. And then I'm also a part-time missionary. I work for Christ for All Nations as a truck driver, actually for them, where we hold massive gospel crusades. I think the record is over 1 million people in one setting. Started by Reinhard Bonnke a little over 50 years ago. And they hold large gospel crusades all over the continent of Africa. So my job for them is I essentially drive a truck full of equipment from one of our 2 warehouses in either Nigeria or in Kenya. And we bring all of the equipment to the country in Africa where we're going to be having crusades. So last year I was in Nigeria. I was in Nigeria, Uganda, the DRC, which is Congo, and Ethiopia. Love doing that. Gotten to see a lot of wonderful people. Gotten to do a lot of amazing things. It's absolutely incredible. So. I'll probably talk about some of those things as we go on this, but the point of this is I've been through a lot of different church scenarios in my life. In today's video, we're going to cover a little bit of my childhood and adolescence, becoming a teenager, and kind of my church experience during that time. But I grew up in a church, mostly charismatic denominations. Where my dad was an assistant pastor, but was actually, pretty abusive. We're going to get into all that. Then some years after I got married, I've been married 21 years here this March. We ended up in a cult. My wife and I started off as a small group church thing that became very cult-like. Our family is going through some massive church split abuse right now. Again, I got half or more of my immediate family is still in a cult that we left, and I'm going to get into all these different things. And so what I wanted to start off with is why am I calling this podcast Religion Hurts? And here's the thing. I love the verse in James. It's James 1:27. It says, "Pure and undefiled religion in the sight of God our Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained from the world." I just love the simplicity of what God is saying, our pure responsibility in religion is. And that's Him first and our neighbor second. So like, if you go to Luke 10:27, just to give a little bit of context to it, it says, you shall, Jesus is being asked, what's the most important commandment in the Bible? And Luke 10:27 says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. So you can see James is echoing essentially what God said is the most important commandments. My really large issue with church as a whole, I shouldn't say church as a whole, with some of these experiences that I've gone through in some of the negative churches, it's rarely ever been those things first. They'll say it's those things first, but it's often manipulation, control, destruction, abuse, all for personal gain. So I'm going to get into a lot of that stuff in the additional episodes, just talking about where I've come from and just all the things I've gone through. Talk about some of my recovery. Again, I get into a little bit more overall depth in the original video here, just kind of giving a recap why we're, in the first video I didn't name the series yet, and so we're calling this my testimony series here, Religion Hurts, and we're going to get into it. So in this video, not the first video, in this video, I'm going to talk about, like I said, my childhood and just a lot of different things with that. So I don't know how long this video will be, but hopefully long enough to at least get through a few things, and we'll just see where it goes from there. So, so I grew up in a town called Orangeville, Ontario. And my dad was a construction guy, was a project manager for a large construction company, had done that all of my life. He's about as kind of blue collar, old school as it would get. I had the nice big mustache that a lot of men have in the 80s. I was born in 79, so a lot of my childhood is the 80s and early 90s. Graduated from high school in 97. And my dad was a super gregarious guy. He was really liked by a lot of people. He was really good at getting to know people, was very friendly, very outgoing, could handle himself in a crowd of people. And I remember noticing that a lot as I was a kid, the way my dad could walk into a room of people and be noticed and stand out and hold his own, and thinking, that was really impressive with him. He had grown up himself in the Christian Reformed Church, which is a Dutch, it's not technically Dutch, but it's a Dutch background. That's where Christian Reformed kind of is, the CRC. They're still, they're not as well known as a lot of other denominations, unless you're kind of from that Dutch background, then that's kind of really well known. So I have a large section of all my relatives still actually go to the Dutch Reformed Church, or the Christian Reformed Church is called, and it still very much has that old kind of style to it, which is actually kind of fascinating. I every once in a while I still go with my grandma or my oma, and I enjoy it. I kind of enjoy the old traditions, in a way. So, but he left the Christian Reformed Church when I was really little. And it was because he always said it was because they didn't believe in the Holy Spirit and speaking in tongues and things of that nature. And he essentially joined a Pentecostal church when I was really young. And I do remember bits and pieces of the Pentecostal church and him kind of going into that as I got a little older. And then eventually got into some charismatic churches and some really, there's a Carmen song that that I always reference, or always think of, I should say, when I'm thinking about the Christian Reformed Church, and there's a line in there where it is talking about Christians from that kind of denomination is the untie my bow tie, who stole my Honda stuff, kind of referring to this group of Christians that are just kind of like almost anything goes. They would say they believe in all the gifts of the Spirit, the speaking in tongues, and this, the that, the kind of the everything, the prophesying, the laying on of hands for healing, and a lot of those things. And but also not very much restriction in a lot of ways, which I'll probably get into at a later date, just kind of some of my views on some of that. But I won't get too much into it today. But so we grew up around a charismatic church, and my dad, he became a pastor at this church, but as a lay pastor. Like, he still had a full-time job, like I said, as a project manager for a large construction company. I think superintendent was his official title, and he did that, like I said, all my life until I was right around 12 to 14, somewhere in there, he got really sick. He developed a lung disease called sarcoidosis and ended up having to not be able to work as much. And we moved to Manitoba. And I'll get into all that in just a little bit. But so during these formative years that I remember, we were living in Orangeville. We were going to a church called Cornerstone Christian Center. It's a very charismatic church. In a lot of ways, I loved it. My mom was the one who sat on the front row at the church, and she would, flip the overheads for for the various songs. And I just remember going every Sunday and doing that kind of stuff. Great, children's ministry and preteen youth group and stuff that I had entered into. And my dad became the assistant pastor at this church. And it was like I said, really well loved, really well liked there and stuff. But we had some secrets, of course, that, otherwise what would be the point of this video without the secrets? But we had some secrets that that he would get into, or some secrets that he would, he was kind of keeping hidden from everything. And essentially, he was really abusive at that time, especially to my mom, very controlling. I really believe, now I'm not a clinical psychologist, and I have no ability to diagnose what the government says people are, or what, psychology says people are. But in my view, my dad was an extreme narcissist. Everything, everywhere was about my dad, especially at home. And he either worked, or when he was home, everything was about him. He had a temper that was absolutely frightening. And you learn very quick to always keep an eye on what my dad was doing. Always keep an eye on him, because you just never knew what was going to happen. And he'd go from being super happy one moment to he had these gray eyes, like blue-gray eyes, and they would turn this like silver color, and it would go through your soul and scare you half to death the way he could be at times. And then again, like I said, at moments he was incredible, kind, fun to be around. He's the type of dad that you could go into public with and be proud of. Like, that's my dad. Look at the way people respond to him. That's my dad. He leads men. That's my dad. And yet at home, we lived in constant fear all the time of who he was and what he was and the way he would be. And I remember my mom, specifically as I was young, how vivacious and full of life my mom was. My grandma told me a story one time of my mom, how she was, 6 or 7, and she wanted to go over to a friend's house. And she'd grown up in Toronto, and she was going down the sidewalk in the rain, and she was just jumping in the puddles, and she was picking up worms. And she got to her friend's house, and the friend's mom wouldn't let her into her house because my mom had a pocket full of worms. Until she emptied out her pockets and cleaned them, my mom wasn't allowed into this friend's house. And I remember, what you describe as that kid, the way she was as an adult in my young life, and the liveliness and just the fun that my mom was. And she was a real spark plug in a lot of ways. Just a real joy to be around. Beautiful, beautiful woman, and could sing. Man, could my mom sing. Just some of my fondest memories are of listening to my mom sing. And she would be in all these women's events, and she'd sing for them all. And she's just such an incredible singer and stuff. And the older I got, the worse everything would get, and the more like a shell of who my mom was, is what would happen. And I think when you're a kid, you don't process, you don't quite understand that what you're living around is wrong, but you just know like something doesn't seem right. And the older I got, the more dead my mom seemed, the more unhappy she seemed, the more in a shell she seemed. And I can't tell you the amount of times I woke up in the middle of the night to the absolute screaming matches between my parents. And my dad would hound my mom and just physically or emotionally just degrade her and put her down. He didn't hit her that I know of. I don't remember ever seeing my dad strike my mom. I think there's a few times he pushed her or incidentally, and that's what they would say is, oh, we kind of stumbled or tripped or whatever. But I don't remember seeing him strike her per se. but I can, I mean, I wouldn't be able to tell you the amount of times that I heard him put her down and the way he would degrade her and the way he would do things. It was horrible. And he would do the same thing with us. He would degrade us being a narcissist, and the way that he did things as a father, he would pick us apart, just pick us from piece to piece. Nothing was ever good enough for him, unless you were feeling down. And then sometimes when you were feeling down, then anything you did was praised. And about the time that you started to feel good again, be about the same time that he would knock you down. And it's I've seen this a lot with manipulators and abusers, and actually this exact scenario carried on a lot through any kind of abusive spiritual relationship that I've ever been a part of. And like I said, I've been part of a few on the receiving end, and which we'll get into again in the series, but it has that strong theme throughout, love and acceptance. When you're down and when you're desperate and when you need it, you're poured into, you're given love and acceptance and encouragement and built up. And about the time that you feel good and you feel confident and you feel, you've got some self-esteem again, you got whatever, then the systematic bam, boom, boom, beating you down, and bringing you back down till you're nothing, till you're zero. Man, it's incredible now to think of. For me, the effect that had as a young man, one of the biggest things that I recognize from that is I learned really early on to gauge how I was doing, if I was okay, if I was in good shape, if I was loved, if I was behaving in a situation, if I was approved of, all came from my dad's reactions. Everything I did was learning how to gauge life off of his reactions and how he would be. And so, if he came home from work and he was in a mood, as one example, of course, you'd have to do the whole, sit there and sit on pins and needles and just be very careful to be very right, and don't be too loud, and don't have too much fun, and don't any of those things, which in itself is hard enough. But I mean, even beyond that, to a deeper level, for example, I've got 3 sons. I talk to them a lot about, their work ethic, their morals, their integrity, doing things because they're right all the time, right? Like trying to teach my kids that that's the way to do things, not because I will or won't love them, not because I will or won't approve of them, but because they're the right things to do, right? Teaching them morals, teaching them character, teaching them integrity. Who are you when nobody's looking? And that's your integrity, right? And so, a lot of this I teach them out of not what I grew up with, but the mistakes that I've made in my life, unfortunately. Wish it was the other way, but thank the Lord. He's got a lot of grace for me, and he's been teaching and growing me, and super, super thankful for that, my word. And so, but instead with my dad, I didn't learn things on how to have integrity or how to have morals based on morals alone. They were much more so based on how would my dad react. Will this get approval from my dad? Will I get his love and acceptance from my dad if I do these things and I behave like this and I do this stuff right? And what a horrible way to live life as a young man. It has been a whole adulthood. I'm 45 years old, so well over 25 years now of learning to live life a different way, learning to reverse that way of being, learning to do things based on this is the way, for example, this is the godly character of a man. Well, what does that mean? Learning about what that is, how that goes, how that functions, and doing things based on that, based on my Heavenly Father's way of wanting, creating who he's made me be and creating who he's made all of us to be. And also recognizing that I have his love regardless. I had his love when I'm at the worst of the worst. I've had his love when I was nothing. I've had his love when I was the scummiest of the scummiest. And I've been really scummy. I've been a really bad person in a lot of ways. And I've never not had Christ's love. He's never not laid down everything for me to come back to him and for me to have him. It's incredible. I've never had to do something to earn Christ's love. And instead, I've been able to change as a man and continue to grow as a man because of who he is in me, but I've had his love and acceptance. What does the scripture say? While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. We didn't earn that death. It's not something we did, or I hate even saying that we earned that death. His death that though gives us the ability to come back to God. We didn't earn that. That's been given as a free gift. And I'm so thankful for that because it's reversed so much of my childhood. I'm not going to go on too much longer about this. I think I'm going to actually get into my adolescence and stuff a little bit more. My dad, like I said, when I was a little bit more next time, but like I said, my dad, when I was 12 years old, ended up twice in wintertime with pneumonia. And that's when he found out he had a lung condition called sarcoidosis. It did eventually kill him. He had a lung transplant later on, and we'll get into all that down the road. But essentially, he couldn't do work the way he had been doing. And he got the company that he worked for, as a superintendent, bought a business in Manitoba. And when I was 14 years old, we moved from Ontario to Manitoba and lived right on the American border, just 5 miles north of the American border, which is, from the time I was 14 through high school until I moved to the States to get married at 24, so 10 years, which is a whole nother thing that I'm going to get into as I went through being a young teenager. Suicidal thoughts came really close a few times, and different things. And my hope, again, with all of this is to put words to my testimony, because I really believe that you do overcome by the blood of the Lamb, through Jesus, and the word of your testimony. And it's to give God the glory for anybody else that's going through all these things, because where all the worst things came in my life through religion, all the best things came in my life through pure religion or through Jesus himself. And I wouldn't be here today without any of that. I really, really don't just believe that, I know that with all my heart. Anyways, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm really looking forward to continuing to do this. I'll keep working on speaking a little more seamlessly and getting into things. But I'm going to try to drop a video once a week. That's the goal. It is hard in a house full of kids and dogs and everything else to find clean, quiet time to record these videos. But I'm really enjoying what we're doing here. And thank you so much for tuning in. May you have a great week, and God bless.